I'd forgive you if you were struggling to keep up with this Arsenal window so far. Martin Zubimendi is an Arsenal player pending confirmation. Kepa is our only actual signing revealed thus far, but it appears as though Christian Norgaard will be joining him soon enough, alongside potentially Christhian Mosquera. The striker debate of course rages on, and sagas such as Rodrygo may prove to be summer-long burners. In the meantime, Arsenal are looking to add a third attacker too, and as of recording, we've agreed personal terms with Noni Madueke. If opinions can and will range across the whys and the whos of Arsenal's window, then there is one player who has garnered more of a universal approval from our typically hard-to-please fanbase, and that's Eberechi Eze. David Ornstein has reported contact has been made between Arteta himself and the player, with the pursuit seen to be separate from a brackets another winger and a centre forward. Sometimes players just give you a good feeling, don't they? Maybe that comes from Eze's Arsenal-coded history. Maybe it comes from his own words, admitting his game is geared towards doing it for the fans, getting them off their feet. And in today's video, we are going to explore whether Eberechi Eze is truly that game changer Arsenal have been crying out for. We're going to scout Eze in detail, his qualities, but also his margins for improvement, forecast his tactical fit in an Arteta Arsenal, and also try to answer some of the questions I had myself when beginning my dig around Eze. For example, is he a valuable maverick supplement to our attack, or does he eclipse that? Can he be a superstar? How would his game translate to a left wing role, for example, for Arsenal? Is he capable of that? And is he capable of having a Gabriel Jesus level impact in terms of infectiousness and bounce? Those were some of the questions. But welcome back to the Harvey Gratian YouTube channel. I'm so glad you found us or are joining us once more. And look, we've got a lot to get on with. So let's start with Eze in possession and what is widely considered to be his USP, his carrying. When Eze is travelling with the ball, bringing it up forward into space, that's where he may be at his most threatening, floating in behind pressers to receive the ball on his back foot in almost those Declan Rice-y zones. There's undoubtedly a visual appeal behind these sequences. Smith Rowe, Grealish, Mitoma spring to mind, but there is more to it than that. Take this clip of Eze, how he keeps the defender sort of tagged along with the fluency and smoothness to his touches. I think these types of players, even if they don't have elite raw pace necessarily, they have the effect of forcing a whole block to backtrack, to backpedal with their carries. And if a player or a defender is tempted, Eze has feints, nutmegs, touches against your momentum with either foot, the ability to absorb contact and eliminate you. But particularly if he can drift in field too to do that. Approaching the final third, Eze continues to flow forward, not rushed by any means, but also not slow. The trick, I think, with Eze's sort of effortless feel to his dribbles is he actually makes the defenders slow down to become slightly more ponderous. He keeps his orientation open, able to burst either way, which is something we've I think criticised Martinelli for in the past, that struggle to fix defenders. But Eze is always going to try and duck and weave towards the inside, which he does here, bearing down on goal, and he never snatches at his shots. And as you can see, especially with, I think, the stockiness of his lower body, he's incredibly difficult to knock out of rhythm. And this getting into momentum, into stride quickly, as well as that comfort he has under contact, give him that capacity to receive with his back to goal, hold off and spin. And it's something that Eze in this Palace side, who play a 3-4-2-1, are almost very RB Leipzig-y in how they play. He's had a lot of that to do with him and Sarr essentially as second strikers hinging off Mateta. Let's move on though to Eze receiving a bit higher up when he's in the pockets. Here he likes to cheat a little bit and receive a line breaker on the back foot facing play immediately and then surging through those zones that, from an Arsenal perspective at least, we can often get stuck in, where we lack this kind of immediacy, proactiveness, but also I think fluency. When the distances do get really tight and cramped, however, I have personally slightly cooled my sense that Eze can find a needle in a haystack and lockpick from these types of positions, if that makes sense. I think we're not getting a Florian Wirtz or a Jamal Musiala, but That doesn't mean that in these tight and cramped situations, Eze still can't unsettle, work clever angles, offer craft and guile, because he definitely can. But I think he's at best when these little gaps open up and then he goes into them without hesitation. For example, I think he's part of a very, very exclusive club of guys who have made Declan Rice rein in their snap in the tackle a bit or look a little bit more uncomfortable defending. And he's done this on a couple of occasions. And I think this also points to how Eze, now 27, has matured a little bit in his understanding of the game. We see here Eze approaching from left wing, how clever he is in trying to work an angle. There are, yes, step overs and feints and chops, but also there's an overriding hunger to get a shot off. And we've seen the kind of more effortless simplicity, I guess, if you will, he can have in some of those longer distance carries. And I think Eze now, he strikes this rare balance between wanting to make a defender look silly and beat him, but not allowing that to get in the way of a real ruthlessness or an efficient streak that he's developed, particularly in transition, which we will see more of later. In terms of your typical 1v1 situation though, Eze is only really a pure eliminator when players are diving in, and that's most often when he is breaking at pace. He's mostly though, especially in wider and tighter areas, more about creating a little bit of space at angle, finding some room. As he approaches Anderson here, who's covering the inside, it's a simple shift onto his left foot and he plates it up for Sarr. Speaking to BBC Sport as well, Eze talked himself about marrying one side of the game, the scoring, the winning, and the instruction from the coach, with the side that I feel and think is important, which is more of the flair stuff, getting the people off their seats. In summary, I think Eze's best work, dribbling and carrying, is when there is already space for him to glide into. But the efficiency and the simplicity that is on show in his game has helped him develop, I think, in the smaller spaces where he has needed that a little bit. Let's move though on to the most underrated side of Eze's game by far from me. That's his passing, more specifically the creative side. Eze's got a lovely weight to his releases in behind, which we can see again most thoroughly through transition, but it also shows how you get the best out of Eze. I think sometimes it's hard for him to be completely on his own in a one-man attack. He does need people around him, and he needs runners specifically to feed. He can launch fast breaks with passes in behind. There's a lovely weight, as I've said to them, and he has a habit then, and he's made a habit of continuing his runs and finishing off moves with a sweeping finish. If you can give Eze a little bit of this setup wherever he is on the pitch, with someone rushing on the outside, someone cheating in behind, and that license, I think, to angle himself in field, that's where he is really potent. It's not only the quality of his actions, but his decision making. This means when the angle is tighter and from wider, most of the time it's about Eze getting his head up and looking for pick-outs, finding separation, cutting it back, often to Sarr for Palace, but also he's created a relationship, a really strong one, with Mateta. We spoke about Eze's first touches a little bit ago, didn't we? And that comes as a real big part of his dynamism, what he brings to the final third, and also that more efficient outlook that he has now. And the flicks and tricks that you see in Eze's passing game aren't extra fluff, but we see how here he sneaks on the blind side of Christian Norgaard and glances it into the path of Mateta, opening up a settled Brentford block, which we know is no easy task. You can see, I think, the effectiveness a Sesko and an Eze duo would have, working off each other's gravity, and with Eze equally, I think, able to interchange and be that backboard with his sort of balance and bums that he has. As you can see here, laying it off for Mateta, dropping into those soft zones to let one rip. Eze's balance, his stockiness, and his flicks are really nice in the pockets. We struggle to access, of course, but also fail to have, at times, the most threatening players we can have occupying them. But, as mentioned, if Eze can lack, maybe this is too harsh to say, that final tier snap in the dribble, it's why he does like to get on the ball and create with some of his passing, to be instinctive, try to penetrate, and when possible, of course in a very transitional Palace team, he likes to get outside the block and behind the ball. Here he can take a little bit too long on the ball at times, and I don't think he necessarily has that killer whipped delivery I feel like we still need to add more of, but his crossing is nevertheless extremely effective from a stats point of view, and from the eyes he shows that in his bigger passing range, whether it's a big switch to Munoz or those releases in behind or those targeted clips to find overloads and to find runners, he does have something to give us in this range. And once more, it's that intent I think that he has to create through almost every single action on the pitch. And even if he is inconsistent, it's a nice complement, I think, from a temperamental side to the other sort of creative options that we have at Arsenal, your Odegaards and your Sakas, that we've needed a supplement and or alternative to. But what about goals? What about the efficiency in the box? That phrase Arteta has spoken about and reiterated that he wants so much. I don't think Eze solves the need that we still have for a more goal-getty, stretchy runner, that we still need at least one more of in our front line. He's actually, though, had to do a lot of that, interestingly, for Crystal Palace, and I think his almost telepathic relationship with Adam Wharton, something I think Martinelli has definitely missed in terms of a relationship in this Arsenal squad, has been really handy. And the volume that he has shown to probe and to threaten for Palace and make those runs and darts in between centre-backs have been developed very well. But this is not, as we know, where he is at his most dangerous. I think he can also add more variety to his finishes, especially because I think his weak foot is really strong and he can certainly shift it onto his left and slam it across goal more. It's definitely something he can work on. But what Eze does from an Arsenal perspective add more of in quality are those hits around the edge of the box. These may be first timers or at the end of those carries where he ducks and drives in field. Here we can see how he sort of senses the momentum of the Forest block. He uses Mitchell's overlap to cut back and spin one onto the bar. Or here how he waits for Lukic of Fulham to get a little bit greedy, nips back and fires it into the corner. The same goes for the drops on the edge of the box, and for games, for example, against deep defences, I know if I've got Declan Rice and Eze inside right and inside left waiting on the edge of the box for cutbacks or those drops, I'm confident we add 4 to 5 more long-range strikes a season as a team. Eze's box arrivals have come on really strong too, which can translate to either our left centre mid or left wing. I like the similarity here between his goal in the cup final against City and Martinelli's against Leicester early on in the season, and with healthier right backs and a specialist at getting first timers off in this zone like Eze, this is a really nice potential look. So his ball striking is, I think, a clear upgrade, but maybe it does lack a bit of variety of a Rodrygo, for example. But Eze does have an awareness in the box, which is not to be ignored. To briefly cover his off-ball work though, his role for Crystal Palace translates well specifically to Arsenal's left wing berth. He's front foot springing onto wide centre-backs, he's pretty diligent in tracking back in wide areas, and he's got good frame and ground power for duels. But maybe I think that anticipation, that defensive awareness or intensity can be Arteta-fied a little bit. For the games where our press is our biggest creator though, or where we need some extra steel in the pivot, I'm not saying Eze can't be our left centre mid, but with its current out of possession responsibilities and with Rice, Marino, Kai, even Zubimendi and Myles later down the line, all capable in that left interior role. But in its current composition, I think Eze will be more of a left centre mid if we're chasing games or we're against that deep block that we don't actually need to press against. For these reasons, I see Eze playing the majority of his minutes at Arsenal in that left wing role. But it's crucial to emphasise, like we said at the start, the separateness of this deal to another winger and a centre forward that Ornstein cited. And Eze has that capacity to play at different heights and different widths and be that versatile attacker we're looking for. But as I have and will, if we go on to sign Eze, continue to stress, he desperately needs to make him really pop. He needs people around him. And by extension, a licence to get a bit closer to the middle of the pitch, which would require, of course, a slight tweaking to our left-hand side as it is currently. Eze, for me, he still leaves that requirement for some more power, some more stretching, some off-ball disruption from me. And it's why I'm so big on keeping Martinelli. which someone like a Sesko, for example, would absolutely help, especially because he likes to run into those left channels. But that running power can also come from left back, replicating that Tierney-Smith Rowe dynamic of 2020 and 2021. Currently though, our best left-hand side for promoting the winger closer to goal is where the left wing, left centre mid and left back are all players sort of comfortable enough playing high or low or wide or narrow, allowing that pod or triangle to interchange and rotate. I wonder if Rice and Eze overlap in their carry zones though, and whether potentially Lewis-Skelly moving into midfield, which would provide Eze those Wharton line breakers, but also another player happy to interchange and play ahead in the pockets, which we want to continue to try and get Myles to do even more, and then the occasional burst on the outside, and then for example a Calafiori type at left centre back who would arrive from deep, rotate with Myles too, go on the outside for Eze, play give and goes. There's plenty of ideas and invention in this pod for sure, and I think it's one of those live a little more lineups that I would like to see sprinkled in certain types of game states. But I think Rice's future, as I continue to bang on about, is something of real interest for me. I'm going to keep emphasising that the more we can get him impacting things globally across the pitch, the better. And in a setup like this, he can start to shift around with Zubimendi from side to side and build up a bit more. And on Eze's side, granted, we still lack a bit of stretching on the outside and in behind, which is why someone like a Sesko is there in this lineup. But with Eze and with Rice being so effective on the carry up, if we can add Rice's depth runs or whips and clips and allow him to tap into a different creative bag that he has on that right hand side, that's a really nice look for me. Of course, this has knock-ons for Odegaard, his future role and his future in the team. But with Zubimendi's presence, a lot of these questions will be answered in due course. Whether we move to a diamond, for example, is another one to be seen as a more default option. I also want to keep in mind, though, that if Eze is to be this third versatile attacker, his ability to interchange in that more backboardy role with Mateta does give potential, genuine potential for me, for him to play in a more Jesus-y false nine or second strikery role. I would not write that off whatsoever. So let's wrap things up. With an Eberechi Eze signing, I may have slightly cooled on just how unstoppable he could be, and can start to see why he hasn't been labelled as necessarily a first choice priority signing. However, as part of a cohort of attacking signings, because we still, like I said, lack that probing, relentless, speedy runner, and possibly that more referencey 9 to work off. Alongside these guys, Eze is a terrific look because on a basic level of talent, on a basic level of an intent to create magic in the final third, the efficiency he brings in bigger spaces, the unsettling, even if not completely alien dribbling, the edge of the box shots, how easily he creates relationships with others, that infectiousness that I think he can ripple into the rest of the team, his versatility, his love for Arsenal. And I think we would be looking to do the deal under his release clause, which is at £68 million now. That looks very good for me. It's not a cover-all basis signing. It's not something I would accept on its own, but it's undoubted quality. And he comes across as well on a human side so well too. And after the week of distressing news, really, this football world has had, both close to home and also in the heartbreaking loss of Diogo and his brother Andre Jota, it should be clearer now, guys, more than ever, that people and life are precious, and Eze entering his prime now feels like someone who gets that, and someone who is Arsenal, because we can't let it slip and we can't forget who we are and who we want to be. I hope you can understand that content has been a bit deferred this week for obvious reasons, but we will be back as normal next week with plenty of videos in the works for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've enjoyed. I'll catch you in the next one. See you later.